Okay, happy Wednesday, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our study hall, our Wednesday study hall here at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Really excited today because we have our Director of Education back with us, Catherine Bugué. So let me bring her up here. And Catherine today is going to be leading us through a red wine tasting note at the WSET Level 3 level. So Catherine, I'll have you jump right in and take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christian. Hello, everybody. Excited to be on with you today. We're going to be taking a Napa Valley red wine through the systematic approach today. Just chose Napa Valley because, as our headquarters, it needs a lot of love and attention right now. I'll reveal the wine at the end, but I just want you to sort of think about how I approach the SAT and the different levels that you need to consider. So let's start right away. I do have a wine in my glass just to show you. You won't be seeing sort of the color or the intensity, clearly from where you are. But just listen to, how the WSET wants us to assess a wine, what we're looking for. The very first thing we want to touch on is the appearance of a wine. And with the appearance, the main things that we talk about are the intensity and the color. How intense is the wine? Is it, opaque, which they call deep, or is it pale? And so one cheat sheet way to do it, for the WSET, that they taught in London is to just go ahead and look down into the glass. Can you see clearly where the stem meets the bowl as you're looking down into the glass? If you cannot see where the stem meets the bowl, then you have a deep wine. That's going to be a deep intensity wine. If you can clearly see the full circle of where the stem meets the bowl, you can either be medium or pale. It could be one or the other. The way that you tell the difference between those two, one way is to go ahead and tilt the glass down at a 45-degree angle above, either your tasting paper or your SAT card if you're practicing. And you want to go ahead and see whether you can, while the wine glass is hovered above the card or your exam paper, can you read clearly everything through between the core and the rim? Can you clear? You don't want to do it at the rim where it's the lightest, and you don't want to do it at the core where it's the deepest. So in between the core and the rim, can you clearly see, and read every word that's on your card or your exam paper? If the answer is yes, you're pale. If the answer is no, you're deep. So many other ways to do intensity. You could just be looking at the saturation of color from the core, the center, to the rim. Or, Peter Marks, MW, he does it a different way. He'll actually put his hand up and behind underneath the glass, and he'll look through it. If he can clearly, see all of his fingers as well as the fact that he needs, to trim his nails, then he's going to call that pale because you can clearly see, your nails through the glass. And then, of course, if you can't see your fingers at all, you're deep. So there's different ways to do intensity. Try out the different ways. Find what works best for you. For the color, when you think of the color scale, that you have, you can see here that for a red wine, the color goes from purple to brown. Generally, you're not going to have a brown wine on your exam. You'd have to have a very old wine or something that might be, faulty, because there are not fortified wines on the exam, right? Because you could end up getting some brown wines on an exam, but at the level 3, there are no fortified wines on the exam, no sparkling wines on the exam. So keep that in mind. When the color is obviously purple or has enough blue tint in it, you could be purple. There are things like, Rhone, Malbec, some Zinfandels can appear to be a little purple. Ruby is your general red wine, and you only move it off from ruby to garnet when? Are some of you level 3 students out there? Anybody know when you move it from ruby to garnet? It's when you see some orange or brown. I know some of you said it out there. Said it to yourselves. So you're going to move it from ruby to garnet if you see some orange or brown. And that's generally going to indicate that there's been some age or maturity on the wine. You're going to go ahead and choose your tawny if there's more orange or brown, yet it's not all the way brown. So there's some ruby still in there, but it will be more dominated by the orange or the brown. That's when you move it off to tawny. Most of the wines from your exam are going to fall between ruby and garnet. Because we don't deal with fortified wines on the exam, it would be a little difficult, for you to get one that was, old enough for us to buy a wine that was old enough to show tawny for a red wine. Okay, so ruby is going to be the most common color for you. So that's your appearance, and you're done. They want you to spend very little time on the appearance and move right on off to the nose. And for the nose, and to be out there, you can even tell say it to yourselves, how many points are available on the nose? Anybody guessing? How many points are available? Is there one for condition? No. There are actually 7 points available for the nose. You get 1 for the intensity, 5 aroma characteristics, and 1 for aroma development. Do keep in mind that aroma development is in the nose section. You couldn't put, a note about the development of the wine under the palate because you won't get a point for it there. The WSET is asking you to comment on the aroma development. So we'll come back to that because we're gonna take this this wine through the nose and through all steps. So first of all, with the intensity, how intense are the aromas? If you want to think of it in, an analogy to music, how loud, is the music? You can think of it like that. But the WSET, advises that you go ahead and you put your nose into the glass if you're able to fully describe the wine, like you're like talking to somebody and saying, wow, red cherry, red raspberry, strawberry. You can just start spilling out, and expressing, this wine in words. You're going to be it pronounced. And think of, some wines that are obviously pronounced, like a lot of Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignons are, very pronounced on the nose. So think of that when you're thinking, is this that loud? Like for your white wines, you'd be thinking of some, Gewürztraminers and Rieslings and, aromatic grape varieties. So you put the glass under your nose. If you're able to fully start explaining it, which I can with this wine, so I'm pegging it as pronounced. Don't be shy about using the ends of the scale. The WSET wants you to. In fact, every time you have a 5-point scale, like you see here for intensity, right? There's 5 different boxes, levels that the wine can fit into. And what the WSET was noticing was that students were like, I don't really want to call it pronounced, so they medium plus. And then they do that again with, acidity and with tannin. And so all these wines were coming in as just medium plus because people didn't want to go ahead and use the ends of the scale. So here's how we fix that. When you have the 5-point scale, turn it into a 3-point scale first. Determine whether it's pronounced, whether it's light, and then if it's neither of those, then you're in the medium camp. And only if you're in the medium camp will you then have a new 3-point scale. So then you have to decide, do I stay at medium? Do I ding it down to medium minus because it's hard to draw out? I'm not getting much and it's hard to draw out aromas. Or, once I go ahead and I swirl and smell and I go, oh, there you are. There's so much here. Then you would be bumping it up to medium plus. You wouldn't change your mind and call it pronounced. You were already in the medium camp and you're going to go to medium plus from there. So with my wine, I was already at pronounced. So I didn't even, have to go to any other parts of the scale. But please do that with any 5-point scale. Go ahead and turn it into a 3-point scale first. It'll help you get to the best answer. Now, if we want to talk about aroma characteristics, one of the best things you can do so that you don't miss certain aroma categories or clusters, as they call them, is to think that, oh, on my SAT, there was floral, there's green fruits, there's stone fruits, there's, have in your mind what those different clusters are and just say, do I have those in my wine? Do I have some? A lot of times for a red wine, the floral that will come out the most is like your violet or your rose. And so ask yourself, do I find that? And if not, move on to the next cluster and the next cluster. It'll help you, pull apart what's in the wine. So for mine, I go ahead and I smell, and I'm getting all these black fruits: blackberry, black cherry, black plum, black currant. There's even some beautiful bright red currant, here. So a lot of black fruit, a little bit of red fruit. But then I'm getting this, there's some oak influence here. Toast, cloves, and sometimes some wines it's less obvious whether there's oak in the wine. And never give yourself a hard time if you didn't catch that there was oak in a wine, or you thought there was and there wasn't. I sit on this tasting panel with winemakers in Napa Valley, and they're all, we go through, Napa Valley wines and assess them, and we're doing it blind. But even these winemakers who are used to pulling wines apart every day can't always agree, on whether there's oak in certain of the wines or not. It's just something that sometimes is not as obvious. And of course, as a wine ages, it's hard because you have an integration of the fruit and the oak. And then, of course, we'll be talking about, whether there's tertiary in the wine. And those start to integrate so well that sometimes it's hard to pull out what's what. And you just get this beautiful integration of these aromas. Okay, but I digress. So with the aromas itself, you have 5 points available, but never just write 5, because if something that you wrote down isn't one that the grader wrote down, then you get, a max of 4 points maybe, or a max of 3 points. Always, always try to max out your points on your aromas and your flavors on the palate, because those are the easier things to get. Levels of things like levels of acidity, levels of tannin, those are a little harder because we all have different sensitivities to acid, to bitterness, tannin. We're going to talk about that. But so the point being, don't forget to put down as many aromas as you can. Don't write down 25 because it'll look like, you just put, the kitchen sink, just to, put out your fishing rod for anything that might work. The WSET will notice that. Your graders are tasting from the same exact bottle that you are on exam day, and then writing up a key. And then we will initially mark your papers, but that's not an official score. They then go to the WSET, that gives a double check, and then lets us release those grades. But just know that we are tasting out of the same bottle that you are, so that you have the same exact wine. Okay, so you want to have at least 7 different descriptors down, if not 9. And if you have a complex, wine, then 10, 12 wouldn't be, unheard of to go ahead and add that. So you do have 3 different types of aromas. You need to think primary, secondary, and tertiary. So your primary are often going to be your, whether you have floral or, your different fruits, whether you have, black fruits, red fruits. Of course, you can't get a point if you were to put down, red fruits. You can't put down what's called a cluster. That's a cluster: red fruits, black fruits. At level 3, they want you to show off your fancy, knowledge of different descriptors, and they want you to say black cherry, black currant. So not just black fruits. So you use specific descriptors, and always think, do I have secondary? And if you're even asking yourself if you do, then write down something that you think, well, let me write down toast. Let me write down, or you're getting something spicy. If you look on the back of the SAT card, there are some choices for spices. They're pretty limited. Nutmegs, clove. If you say to yourself, I don't know what those things smell like, it would be so inexpensive to just go buy a little, from a spice rack, and go ahead and smell those things. But generally, if you're unsure, use nutmeg and clove, because those are 2 of the spice names that they have on the back of the SAT card. And you do want to try to stick to those descriptors that are on the SAT card, because the grader is going to get a copy of that card and then circle things to create their marking key. They can add in aromas and flavors, but the bulk of your points are going to be from the descriptors that are on that card. Okay, now for tertiary, that is when you have something that shows maturity in the wine. And you can see on the back of the SAT card, there are things like your savory and wet leaves, leather, tobacco, dried fruits, dried blackberry, dried red cherry. Those are great descriptors for a wine that's showing some age and some maturity. So think about that. There's 3 different types. And if you have each of the types in the wine like mine does, I have primary. I had those red fruits I mentioned, black fruits. I had herbaceous. I had herbal. Of course, I'm just mentioning the clusters now, so I'd get 0 points. But then you also want to ask yourself, okay, do I have secondary? And then write those down. Do I have tertiary? And think about it. Step back from the wine and say, am I smelling just all fresh, young fruits? Like from the store or just picked, off of the tree? Or is there something a little more dried or a little more mature about these aromas? So that's what you really need to ask yourself. Okay, so those are the 3 types of aromas. Let's move on to aroma development. If you have a wine where there's some tertiary, you're going to call that wine developing instead of youthful. Youthful is just going to be, your primary and your secondary. But if you have a wine that was just bottled and it is all, in Napa Valley, we'll pick on Napa Valley today, you have all these red and black fruits and you've got vanilla and toast and nutmeg and clove and you've got so much, oak in that wine. And you think, oh my goodness, I need to call this developing. You wouldn't get that right. If a wine is youthful and it has either primary and or secondary, that's still pegging it as youthful. You only move your assessment off to developing if there's some tertiary showing some maturity. Okay, and then of course you're going to move it off to fully developed if you pretty much were listing all tertiary descriptors. So the bulk of your wine shows that that's a mature wine. Then you'd call it fully developed. You could potentially get it fully developed on the exam, but it is tough to buy a wine that's old enough to show that. We can sometimes, and we do, but just know that it is tough. You're going to have really just all tertiary, and you're not going to be able to pull out separate primary, secondary, and tertiary. It's going to all be beautifully integrated at that point. You're pretty much not going to get a tired past its best wine on the exam, so that makes it easy. Takes off one of the choices. All right, let's go off to the palate now. So for the palate, you want to go ahead, and what I love to tell people is please don't go and take a nice little, I hate to call it a sissy sip, but you need to take a big old sip of this wine and swish it around like mouthwash, because then you can really get the wine all throughout your mouth to make the best assessments. So you want to just take a good old sip and really treat it like mouthwash. When we look at the sweetness scale, of course, we could get, a red wine with some sweetness, but most of them are going to be dry. And for us, this scale here, we're not going to use luscious. In fact, for the WSET, luscious is reserved for really sticky wines, Rutherglen Muscat, PX Sherry, which of course you wouldn't get on the exam anyway, because that's a fortified. Both of those are fortified. So you're not going to have a luscious wine on the exam. You could have a Sauterne or a Tokay on the exam, and that would show up as sweet. Those are your sweet wines. Something that is sweet enough to be a dessert wine or sweet enough to be paired with a very sweet dessert. So that's your sweet. If you're even asking yourself if there's some residual sugar, then likely it's going to be off dry. You just slightly detect something, often on the tip or the sides of your tongue. For the most part, though, the red wines on the exam are going to be dry. But let me just finish the thought about the sweetness levels in any event to decide whether it's medium dry or medium sweet. If you're detecting that there's sugar in the wine, and that's a characteristic that you can't ignore about the wine, there's sweetness in that wine, but it's not sweet enough to be a dessert wine and or to pair with a sweet dessert, then you're going to be in the medium range. If that sweetness carries through all the way through the finish, call it medium sweet. And if the sweetness stops before the finish, call it medium dry. Generally, that would be something like a Riesling might show up on the exam. Generally not for a red wine. So I'll move on. Acidity, it's how much you're salivating. You're not going to be talking about how you feel it in certain parts of your mouth. You only want to, it's like putting on the acid hat and only concentrating on whether you are salivating or not. That's the way you're going to differentiate it from tannin. Because a lot of times with a red wine, you've got tannins going and then you've got the acid going and you're like, wait, which is which? What am I feeling? That will not be a problem at all if you just consider how you're salivating, how long you're salivating, and only concentrate on that for your acid assessment. And then we'll talk about tannin in a minute. So for this wine here, you swish it around like mouthwash, you spit, and then you I do a count off just to help me. And I say, ooh, salivating. And you can either swallow in between or just keep seeing if it's repooling in your mouth. And you say, wow, salivating, still salivating, oh, wow, still salivating, which is medium. Just, still salivating is medium plus if it goes right after the 3. And then if you're still salivating at 4 and beyond, you're at high acid. So it's how long you're salivating is what you want to consider. You're pretty much for your tannin level. And I'm so sorry I didn't turn off the home phone. So it'll ring. But anyway, for your tannin level, you're thinking about how drying the wine is all throughout your mouth. If you're feeling that drying sensation across your gum line, which you'll usually often feel it right there. If you're feeling the drying sensation there and all across your palate, you're going to be higher in tannin. If you're only feeling the dryness, say just on your gum line and not anywhere else, you're going to lower your perception, your assessment of tannin. So think about where the tannin is. If it's all along your mouth, then you're going to have to go higher. So my wine, I went ahead and I swished it before today so that you didn't have to watch me swish away. So earlier I went ahead and assessed it, and I had a drying sensation that was all across my gum line, and it started on my mouth, but not enough for me to peg it as high. So if it mainly shows across the gum line, I ding it down to medium plus. So then I had enough of a drying sensation. It felt like I had a good old number of cotton balls stuck up there, but not all across my palate. So I lessened that to some extent. For the alcohol, you're pretty much guessing with the alcohol, right? Low, it's going to be really hard for you to have a red wine that's low, under 11%. So you're pretty much going to be dealing with medium or high. How do you determine which one? Well, if you feel any warmth, after you either expectorate or if you even want to swallow a little during the exam just to be sure, if you're feeling some warmth, and of course, it could even affect your pain receptors if it's high enough so that you could feel that heat and some discomfort. So you're looking for those sensations, that warmth, to determine whether you're going to go and peg it as high. So my wine, I did feel, that warmth when I went ahead and swallowed. And so I peg my wine as high. For the body of the wine, there's a couple ways you can look at it, but I always look at the weight of the wine on my palate. How heavy does it sit there? And of course, a lot of people, and you've heard us say before, we use that, we didn't create it, but the milk analogy, does it feel like 2% milk? Does it feel like whole milk? Does it feel like half and half? Just so that you can sense how heavy is it sitting on my palate. And mine sits nice and heavy. It feels like this rich, sort of ribbon that's sitting there. And so then I'm pegging it as full bodied. You can also think about, one of my colleagues, Janet, thinks about, its movement, around your mouth. Something that's nice and full bodied and rich, is just going to, be fluid across your palate. And something that's, has less body is just going to sort of sit there and not be like that beautiful ribbon of texture. Okay, mousse is only for sparkling wine, so we can move on. And remember, you'll never get a sparkling wine on the exam. Flavor intensity, generally you're going to want to put the same level as your aroma intensity for the most part, or you'll be one level away. We were pronounced, so do we feel like we're also have that kind of intensity of flavor on the palate? For mine, I do. But again, it's the intensity that you're getting. Flavor characteristics. Anybody remember how many points you get for flavors? Is it the same as aromas? No? Okay, it's three. Three different descriptors are needed here. Are you going to put three? No, remember, always put more. So put at least 5. And of course, you still have to consider whether you have the 3 types. So primary, secondary, and tertiary. Now, one thing I didn't mention with the aromas that's very important, and it's true for the aromas and for the palate, is when the grader goes ahead and grades, if all 3 types are found in the wine, you must have at least one descriptor that's primary, at least one descriptor that's secondary, and at least one descriptor that's tertiary. So that means I could only get full marks on my wine here today if I did something like black cherry, toast, and leather. So I had 1 in each of, the types. So keep that in mind. And please, just don't write 3. I see that so many times and I think, oh, this is where you can get the points easy. Anyway, for the finish, it's how long the pleasant flavors go. So once you swish it around again like mouthwash and you expectorate, how long do those, and I usually do just to count off Mississippi's, how long, are those, flavors going? And you don't count things like if it's the red fruits or the black fruits go away and it's just the bitterness from tannins, or if you have a white wine and the lemon citrus goes away, but you're just getting like an acid streak, you don't count that. Only the pleasant, beautiful floral or fruity, flavors you want to consider in your finish. And you only want to give a wine a long finish if, the book says you want those to go on for a minute. Think of beautiful wines where those flavors just linger on that palate. Now, of course, during the exam, you're not going to have a watch, maybe to are you going to sit there and see if it's a full minute or not? So we go ahead and we use a count-off system, so, flavors are going, Mississippi. The flavors are going, Mississippi. The flavors are going, Mississippi. So it's that count-off system that we use. And then it makes it just a little easier and something tangible to use. But if those are going to finish before you get to 4, and then you don't have a long finish. Okay, let's go to the conclusions. There's 2 points available for the conclusions here. The quality level. On the exam, you're not going to get a faulty or a poor wine. So you're going to be dealing with an acceptable wine, a good wine, a very good wine, or an outstanding wine. I hope you get an outstanding wine. It happens a lot on the exam, but it doesn't matter. Here's how you assess it. You want to use their Blick system. And so you want to rate your wine against 4 parameters. So you want balance, length, intensity, and complexity. You want to think of all of those 4 things. If the wine has all 4 of those things, you're going to call it outstanding. If it has 3 of those criteria, you'll call it very good. 2, good, 1, acceptable. And here's how you assess it. Balance. When you're deciding whether to give the check to balance or not, Do you have a balance between the fruity or sweetness of the wine and the other structural components, the acid, the tannin, the alcohol? Does something stick out, making the wine less than desirable? You're not being ultra picky here at the level 3. So you're not saying, oh, well, the alcohol just sticks out ever so slightly. No, you're not being overly critical. Is there something that is a flag that says, you know what, this wine, I can't assess this wine, highly, because that alcohol, but there's no fruit to support it. There's no, just think about it. Do you in general have enough fruit or sweetness to balance out the acid and tannin and alcohol? Pretty much the answer is 99% of the time going to be yes. Because we're not trying to show you, faulty wines. We will not give you a faulty wine on the exam. For length, it has to be long. So must be long for you to give it the check. For intensity, you want to be at the ends of the scale. So you want an either aroma intensity and or flavor intensity. Did you put either medium plus or pronounced? If you did, then you're going to want to give that wine a check for intensity. And then complexity is a little harder. We tried to come up with something tangible, but it's not so easy. It's not like you could say, hey, if you have 3 clusters or more, call it complex. Believe me, we sat around, we tried to think of a way to make it a little more tangible. Just need to use, if you would, some sense, like, is this a wine that I would describe to my colleagues or a customer as complex? It may have, lemons, citrus, and peach fruit, and then maybe a little mineral, but if it only really has, a certain number of things, but it's not a wine, it's refreshing, it's delicious, but it's not a wine that you'd be like, oh my goodness, try this wine, there's so much going on in it, then don't call it complex. So that you're just going to need to use your judgment for. But my wine had the balance between the fruit and the other components. It had a long finish. It had intensity. Remember, it was pronounced in both aromas and flavors. And it had complexity. I mean, not only did I have all 3 types, I had primary, secondary, and tertiary, but I had so many. I had red fruits and, black fruits. I had herbal, I had herbaceous, I had, I didn't even mention the violet, the floral that was there, but then but then I even had numerous secondary and numerous tertiary. So that is something you would absolutely call complex. So I was lucky enough to be able to sip that wine today. So thank you for that. Okay, last but not least, you have to answer the question about the level of readiness for drinking and potential for aging. You're not going to assess the wine as too young or too old on the exam, pretty much. You're going to hone in on can you drink it now, but it has the potential to age, or drink it now, not suitable for aging or further aging. And here's how you answer that question. You're going to ask yourself 2 questions. 1, does the wine have something structurally that will allow it to age? What does that? What allows a wine to age? Acid, tannin, maybe your sugar if you have a sweet wine. So our wine, had higher acidity, higher. We had medium plus on both the acid and the tannin. So we are going to have something that allows this wine to age. And so check, it's got that, but you can't just go on that. You must ask yourself that second question. Will it get more interesting if you lay it down for 3+ years? Use 3 years as the marker. So will it get more interesting? Because say you had a basic Pinot Grigio from the Veneto, and it was like high acid, some citrus fruit, that was it, right? If you ask yourself only that first question, well then, sure, you can drink it now, but it has the potential to age. If it was just about having something structurally, it has the acid to let it age. But that's not a wine that you would recommend to a customer or to a friend to say, buy a case of this and keep trying one over the years. It's going to get so much better. It may survive, but it won't thrive. Think of it that way. Anyway, so you're looking for it to improve, to get better. And of course, that's going to be the classic wines of the world. And it is true, of this, the wine that I'm drinking now, this Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. It has something structurally, and I can see it taking on even more tertiary and getting even more interesting. And in fact, it will be hard at that point for me to pull out what's primary, what's secondary, and what's tertiary, because again, it would be all beautifully integrated. And that's going to happen over time with a wine that has the right concentration of fruit with those structural components that will allow it to age beautifully and take on tertiary as it ages. Well, so for this wine, it is a, can drink now, but has the potential to age. One mistake that a lot of people make on the exam is that they'll think that the wine can age, and they'll be like, drink now, but can age. No, when you're saying drink now, in this regard, you're saying you should drink it now. Don't let that wait. You're the professional at the level 3. You take your fancy, level 3 certificate. You're the expert, and you give the advice. Drink this now. This isn't a wine for aging. That's what you're telling, people as you giving the advice. So if you were to tell somebody, drink it now, but it can age, they'd be like, wait a minute, do I drink it now or do I let it age? You don't want to combine those two. You have to give the assessment as closely worded as those two options on your SAT card. Now, if I may, can have just 2 more minutes. We good, Christian?
Oh, we're great. I'm eating this
Okay.
up. I think the crowd is too, so keep going.
Okay, I do want to make a point because I know that if anybody out there is studying for the level 3 now or is thinking of taking the level 3, one thing I really want to drive home. I just did a mentoring session today, and the student was struggling with how to answer these short written answer questions. That was a theory part of the exam. And the light dawned on him as soon as he realized what the WSET was looking for. When you are writing your short written answers and the WSET asks you to explain something, and they do often, because level 3, they want you to take facts and connect them for, how does that fact affect or influence the style or the quality level or the price level of that wine. Level 3 is all about that, taking influences and seeing how it affects the wine. So when you have to explain something, you want to be the teacher. So say you had to explain carbonic maceration. You couldn't then dive into, just describing about the whole clusters and this and that. You'd first have to tell your class what carbonic maceration is. Think of yourself, don't even think that the WSET knows a thing. Assume that they are your classroom and you are teaching them and you even need to prove to them that you know the most basic facts. Don't assume they know anything. If they ask you a question about white Zinfandel, you're going to want to tell them that it's a rosé wine, made from red grapes, in this case, Zinfandel. Yeah, really. I mean, something you want to explain. Just again, think of them as your class, and you're teaching them even the basics of what you know. So just give one more example before we wrap up. But say you have to explain, why an Alsace, wine, is full-bodied and has pronounced intensity. You'd be thinking about the influences. Well, if you're going to link an influence, in this case, it's a topographical influence, right? You've got the Vosges Mountains acting as a rain shadow. And so then you're going to have these dry, sunny conditions where the grapes, because the storms that come in from the west precipitate over the Vosges, and then you've got these dry, sunny conditions. So you have ripened grapes that are going to give you, they're going to build up high sugars, and those sugars are going to translate into alcohol that then gives you body in the wine and gives you more intense flavors the riper that they are. So you're making a connection between an influence, the Vosges, something topographical, and the style of the wine. You want to think like that. Make those, connections for them. Level 3 is all about influences and how that affects the the style or the quality level or the price level of a wine. Okay, I'll let you go. I could go on all day.
Great. We absolutely adore your enthusiasm, and I think everyone does here. You've gotten some really nice shout outs and comments from everyone. So thanks so much for leading the session today, and I know we want you back very soon on another Wednesday. Just as a quick reminder, we do run regular trivia games on Monday, 2 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, so make sure and join those. Great way for you to check in on your knowledge. Those are always a lot of fun. So thanks to you who are able to join us on Mondays. And then, of course, every Wednesday we have another study hall on a different WSET topic for you. So today was red wine, and Catherine, an amazing job. Thanks again for joining us. Until next Monday, take care, drink well, and stay safe. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.